Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm taking some of your questions on some of the technical aspects of filming that you've asked in this segment of Ask Judy. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. I've mentioned in a few of the segments that things were caught on camera that maybe weren't supposed to be. In some cases, it's evident just that we were on this studio lot and a telephone pole or something that we shouldn't have been able to see or was visible, but there was nothing they could do about it, and it goes by quickly. In other times, there were things like a bit of a stand that was visible just in the corner of the frame, and I thought these were accidents, and then John Dayton, our longtime production assistant who's helped me out with some segments, shared some information about that I thought I would share with you. And he said, as for the C-stand and flag, it looks like, to me, they were in the safe areas. Television sets back in the 70s did not show the entire frame. Picture tubes in homes had slightly curved, rectangular tubes with rounded corners. And there were even some older color sets in service from the late 50s and 60s, which had round picture tubes and a mask placed in front. I mean, I remember, when I first started watching TV, TVs were more square. And so if you ever watched something that was in more of a rectangular, like movie framing, you always lost the top and the bottom when you were trying to watch it on your square TV. And that still happens sometimes on TVs where the aspect ratio of how they filmed fills a regular TV set differently. So that makes total sense to me, just beyond the technical things that John's mentioning here. Okay, so the Panavision camera we used had an eyepiece that showed a perfectly rectangular 3x4 frame, which represented the full frame of the 35 millimeter film, the film being exposed. Within that perfectly rectangled exposure frame was a black lined smaller rectangle with rounded corners. This was called the safe area and indicating what viewers would see in their homes. So occasionally, while blocking a scene, the camera operator might spot something in the square rectangle, but clear of the slightly smaller, rounded, cornered, safe area. Usually a microphone, but in this case, the C-stand. He would tell the director of photography or the director. They would look through the lens and make a decision either to reset or to go ahead, knowing the mic or C-stand would not be seen by the folks at home. With us, we were always pushed for time. And Harry Harris was directing. I recall my note on the misspelling of Charlottesville. Yep. Where I told Harry of the mistake and he said they'll never catch it. So in all probability, if Harry was informed of the C-stand, it's my guess he probably said they'll never catch it and smiled. Today, our screens are true rectangles. Therefore, we see the full frame, something that was not of concern back in the day. So a couple of those examples where I talked about the C-stand being visible in the theft, and also in the chicken thief going down the road, where you see a piece of camera here, equipment in the bottom of the frame, and likely that was originally in the safe area. Recently, I answered a question from someone about how the sound editing was done in order to, with multiple takes, how you could seamlessly attach the sound to it. And I answered that question, but Ralph Sinensky, our many-time director, added some extra information here to that. Hi, Judy, I can answer the sound question. The film and sound for each take were on separate tracks. The tracks were coded, so when the film was run through the Moviola, which is a piece of equipment that was used for that, the two tracks would be coordinated. So a little extra piece of information for you on that. Thank you, Ralph. I called once again on my good friend John Dayton, our former production assistant turned director, producer, writer, to answer a couple of other technical questions that were asked of me. So these are John's assistants to me in questions from Dave. Does the director participate in editing, or does it just hand off to the editor? John said, on the Waltons, the director was not paid to participate in the editing. However, there were times when directors would come in on their own time to express opinions. These were generally accommodated by the editor. And I think Ralph Sinensky, our director, had mentioned that also. Then Dave said, If the editor is doing the cutting and splicing of film, how is the film organized for him? Is it by scene and the type of shot? John responded, here's the simplest way to explain it. In the way back when of the Waltons, each scene we printed on stage was printed on strips of film which, believe it or not, were hung up by clips on a clothesline. Close-up strips, over-the-shoulder strips, etc., were wound onto a reel, R-E-E-L, viewed on an editing machine called a Moviola. There, the editor could view two strips of film simultaneously, say a close-up and a wide shot, cut them so they were in sync, and glue them together in the proper order. In sound editing, the sound editor would not actually edit the sound, but would create the sounds. This is beyond what Ralph Sinensky just talked about with them being on two separate tracks, the sound on one and the film, the video, the picture on the other. So John's talking a little bit more about those external sounds, those extra sounds. So in sound editing, the sound editor would not actually edit the sound, but would create the sounds like a horn honking, etc. It was a hoot to walk into a sound editing room at Warner Brothers in those days where you would see literally hundreds of magnetic strips of sound effects hanging from lines, each with its own special effect. You never knew what you were going to hear in the hallways from an oink to a freight train. My dear friend Joe von Stroheim was a Warner Brothers sound editor. Joe told me his mother sat at their kitchen table and hand-colored the tinted frames of the movie one by one. So special. I love watching old information about how animation was done when every frame was hand painted in, the early Disney days. And now, of course, everything's digital. John added some bonus for Dave, is what he calls it. When the decision was made to shoot I Love Lucy on 3 film cameras running simultaneously, the first sitcom in history to employ this technique. Nowadays, the majority of sitcoms are shot in front of a live audience with 3 cameras. So they can shoot a wide shot and a couple of close-ups, and I believe soap operas are kind of done similarly. So the camera sort of sits in front of the sets, very much like you're watching the theater, and the sets are potentially side by side, and the cameras just reset as you move, say, from the living room into the kitchen and things like that. So you're pretty much always shooting from the same front angle, as opposed to with something like the Waltons, where the camera could completely turn around and a wall would be put back in and we'd shoot the other direction. Sitcoms tended to be staged from the front like a theater production, so that everybody sort of cheated more forward and the camera could potentially get side shots, but never full reverses. Anyway, continuing on. All right, so my friend Dan Kahn invented what we call the 3-headed monster. So here is a picture of what was called an editor's moviola. The film from each camera is placed on a reel and run through a viewer. At the bottom of the viewer, you will see a small silver plate. To the side of the plate is a razor blade. The film is cut, hung on a rack, and glued with the other clips to complete the cut scene. Danny and Bill Mosier, who cut all of the I Love Lucy episodes, Desi Arnaz gave strict instructions that all of the film on the cutting room floor be burned, and Danny saw to it that none survived. So if you see a YouTube video claiming they have outtakes from I Love Lucy, they do not. What survives today are behind-the-scene home movies taken by crew members. On the Waltons, we shot with 1 camera, rarely with 2, and as I recall, on one occasion, the Ferris wheel with 3. 1 was handheld. John also helped me with a question from Joe, who said, does your comment about 35mm film providing warmer look have anything to do with color temperature? I was talking about how I preferred the look of film because it created a warmer look than video and even digital now, although digital's come a long way. So he was asking whether that had to do with color temperature, and John says, yes, color temperature is expressed in degrees Kelvin. The lower the expression of the temperature, the warmer, redder the film will look, and the higher the expression of the temperature, the cooler. So if you have a Kelvin setting of 2700, that's going to be a warmer. You can notice this in your home lighting. If you choose light bulbs that are a lower Kelvin temperature, like 2700 to 3000, your lighting in your room will appear warmer. Whereas if you go higher up on the Kelvin scale, 4000 or something, it's going to be a little whiter and bluer in look. Christmas lights, same thing. You see the very white ones that are sort of whitish blue, and then you see the ones that are kind of a warmer yellowish tone. Emotionally, we associate red tints with hearth and home, the glow of the fireplace where family and friends gathered, as did the warmth of the kitchen stove, which was fueled by fire, where meals were taken together. The cooler tints with cooler or colder emotions. When I worked on the show, the negative film stock we used was Kodak 5247, for those of you really techie people. The film was sensitive to reds, therefore when printed, scenes appeared warm and elicited a warm emotional response. As best as I can recall, a switch was made to Fuji 35mm film stock sometime during the late 5th or early 6th season. Fuji was cheaper. However, the film was more sensitive to blue, which when printed gave scenes a blue tint or cool feeling. An attempt was made at the lab to push the Fuji film to the redder, warmer side, but overall the print suffered in quality. So in order to effectively appropriate the family feel, the switch was made back to the Kodak 35mm 5247 despite the cost. So I also remember that during that time when we tried the Fuji film, our makeup artist had to push more red into our makeup to keep us from looking kind of yellowy, So attempts were made to make it work more. Then Joe additionally asked, can it be manipulated in the digital format to mimic the look of film? So that's definitely a major question. John goes into a very technical thing that I'm not going to get into right now. But in having worked with various different directors of photography in the digital era as well, I know that they work with different sorts of techniques to try to, as much as possible, approximate the warmer sort of depth of field that you get with film. In some cases, I worked with one crew that would just put a faint, just a very slight layer of smoke, they'd get a fog machine or something like that, and they'd pump that in, and they'd wait until it settled to just a very almost invisible degree left, and they'd shoot that way, which just created a different feel to the digital aspect. I used to find videotape versus film much more obvious. Nowadays, I think they have done well with digital, and that many directors of photography have created the best possible techniques to make it look as close to film as possible. But if you're really a purist, then a lot of those directors still insist on shooting on film. And that's what I have for you on this more detailed technical bonus segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons Ask Judy. So if you ask me technical questions, chances are I'm going to have to go to other sources than myself, but I'll do the best I can to answer your various questions. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.